People often ask why this ultra easy monetary policy hasn't led to higher inflation in the way that some people think the textbooks say that it should. People who say that the Fed is printing money and that's bound to lead to higher inflation and a collapse in the US dollar are usually thinking about historical examples such as Weimar Germany in the early 1920s, or more recently in Zimbabwe under Robert Mugabe, or in Venezuela under Hugo Chavez and now Nicolas Maduro. But in fact, if we look in a bit more detail, what we see is that although the Fed has certainly been creating rapid growth in base money, and more recently in broader measures of the money supply such as M2, that hasn't been flowing into purchases of goods and services in a way that would in turn create a situation of, as Friedman famously put it, too much money chasing too few goods, that in turn is the basis for the emergence of hyperinflation in the examples that I mentioned before. You can see if you look closely at this chart that during the financial crisis, the monetary base, that's essentially the liabilities of the Federal Reserve and the currency in circulation, rose very rapidly by more than 100%, but it didn't result in an increase in broader measures of money such as M2 because the Fed was seeking to offset the collapse of the banking system, which meant that the banking system during the financial crisis simply wasn't capable of converting base money into money that could in turn be lent to households and businesses. Indeed, what the Fed was trying to do was to avoid the mistakes that the Fed made in the early 1930s when it stood idly by as banks collapsed, as the money multiplier collapsed, and that was really what put into the Great Depression. Ben Bernanke, who was chairman of the Federal Reserve during the global financial crisis, had previously spent most of his academic career studying the mistakes that led to the Great Depression and which made it worse. And famously, on Milton Friedman's 90th birthday,